The day my water got shut off was the same day I gave the last jug I owned to a stranger dying on my front steps. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know he'd still be with me 68 years later, on the night I finally understood who he was. But I'm getting ahead of myself, the way old women do. Let me start at the beginning, because the beginning is where God was already working long before I noticed. My name is Amina Saleh. I am 81 years old. I was born in Ib, Yemen, and I came to Dearborn, Michigan in 1971, a bride of 19, clutching a suitcase and a Quran my mother pressed into my hands at the airport in Sana'a. I raised my son on Dix Avenue. I buried my husband in the Islamic cemetery off Ford Road. And for most of my life, I would have told you I knew exactly who Jesus was. Isa, we call him, a prophet, a word from God, born of Mary, who healed the sick and will return before the end of days. I honored him the way I was raised to honor him. I did not know he would come to my door. The summer I am telling you about was the summer the city cut off water to half of South End Dearborn over unpaid bills, mine included. I was 73 years old, living alone on disability and what my late husband Ibrahim had left me, which was not much. The bill was $411. I did not have $411. I had a 5-gallon jug I'd filled at my niece's house 3 days before, and I was rationing it the way you ration anything when you don't know when more is coming. That morning, I was out front sweeping the little strip of sidewalk in front of my house. My mother used to say a clean doorstep is a quiet kind of prayer, and I have never stopped believing her. The heat that week had climbed past 95 degrees, thick and wet off the river, the kind of heat that makes the asphalt shimmer and the old people on my block stay inside with box fans running. That's when I saw him, a man walking up Dix, moving slow, favoring one leg. He wore a gray work shirt soaked through, jeans gone pale with dust, and boots that had clearly walked farther than boots are meant to walk. His skin was sunburned raw across the back of his neck. I took him for one of the day laborers who sometimes waited outside the hardware store on Warren hoping for cash work. Nobody paid him any attention. Nobody ever does. Then, about 20 feet from my porch, his knees buckled and he went down hard onto the pavement. "Water," he said, barely above a whisper. "Please, anybody." Doors on my block did not open. I saw Mrs. Farah's curtain twitch. I saw old man Dawood glance out his screen door and go right back to his newspaper. And then Malik Haddad, the man who owned half the storefronts on that stretch of Dix, including the building I rented my house from, stepped out onto his porch across the street with a bottle of imported water in his hand, looked at the stranger crumpled on the sidewalk, and actually laughed. "Get up," he called out. "This isn't a shelter. Go beg somewhere else." A couple of the younger men lounging outside Malik's shop laughed with him. Nobody moved. I stood there with my broom in my hand, and something in my chest twisted. I thought about my 5 gallons of water sitting on my kitchen floor. That water needed to last me until I could figure out $411 I did not have. If I gave it away, I genuinely did not know what I would drink that night. But my husband used to say something to me, back when he was alive and doing woodwork out of our garage. "Amina, the man who shares what little he has ends up richer than the man who hoards a fortune. God doesn't weigh the jug. He weighs the hand that offers it." I went inside. I picked up that jug, heavier than I expected, water sloshing against the plastic, and I carried it out to where the stranger was still on the ground, chest heaving. "Here, I said, kneeling down slow because my knees haven't been young in 20 years. Drink. It's not much, but it's what I have. He looked up at me. And I want you to understand something about those eyes, because I have thought about them every day since. They were dark and tired, and they had clearly seen more suffering than one man's lifetime should hold. But they were not empty. There was something underneath the exhaustion that felt like it was looking straight into me, past my headscarf, past my rationed water and my unpaid bill, into whatever was actually true about my life. He drank slowly, not gulping like a man dying of thirst, though he clearly was one. He drank like the water mattered to him, like he was receiving something sacred instead of something desperate. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally, handing the jug back. "Everyone else walked past me." "I know what it is to be thirsty and have nobody answer," I told him. "My mother taught me that when a stranger comes to your door, you never really know who you're receiving." He looked at me a long moment. "Your mother was right," he said. "Most people forget that." Across the street, Malik was still watching, arms crossed, smirking. "Crazy old Amina," he called loud enough for the block to hear. "Giving her last water to a bum. She'll be begging for a cup herself by winter." I did not answer him. I helped the stranger to his feet. He was taller than I expected and thinner, like he hadn't had a real meal in days. And I said the only thing that made sense to me. "Come inside, you need shade, and you look like you haven't eaten. I don't have much, but no one leaves my house hungry while I have bread." His name, he told me once we were inside, was Isa. I did not think anything of it at the time. It is a common enough name where I come from. It's simply Arabic for Jesus, a name plenty of Muslim men carry without a second thought, in honor of the Prophet. I would understand later why it wasn't a coincidence. My house is one room and a kitchen, really. A prayer rug in the corner, a couch older than my son would have been if he'd lived, a small table where I take my meals alone. I was ashamed of it, if I'm honest. A wealthy man like Malik would have looked at my home and seen nothing worth noticing, but Isa looked around slowly, and there was no pity in his face, only a kind of stillness. "You live simply," he said. "I live poor," I corrected him, embarrassed. "There's a difference, but people rarely notice it." "I've eaten in mansions where the silence at the table was heavier than any grief I've carried," he said. "And I've eaten in rooms smaller than this one where I have never felt more welcome. Don't apologize for what you have, Amina. Where love is present, nothing is missing. I don't know how he knew my name. I hadn't told him. I had one loaf of pita bread left and half a container of lentils I'd been stretching for 3 days. I split the bread and, without thinking, gave him the larger piece. "You should keep the bigger share," he said, watching me. "I can see you haven't eaten properly in days either." "You've been walking the road," I told him. "The road makes a different hunger than sitting still does. I'll manage. I always have." He took the bread, but before he ate, he bowed his head briefly, the way you do before a meal, and said words too quiet for me to catch all of. Then he broke his piece and handed half back to me. "We eat together," he said. "Bread shared feeds twice as much as bread hoarded." We ate, and that stale bread, dry as it was, tasted like something I did not have a word for. It tasted like being seen. He asked about my life, and something about him made it impossible to give the polite, short answers I usually gave people. I told him about Ibrahim, my husband, the carpenter, 12 winters gone now. I told him about the shop where he taught our son to sand a table edge until it was smooth as glass. And then, because he asked gently, like he already half knew, I told him about Yusuf. "My son," I said, and my voice went thin the way it always does. "He was 20 years old. A fever took him. 3 days, and on the 4th morning he didn't wake up. I buried him next to his father on the hill above Ford Road. Isa didn't look away from me the way people usually do when grief gets uncomfortable. He held my gaze, and his own eyes were wet. Tell me about him alive," he said. "Not just how he died. Who was he?" Nobody had asked me that in 12 years. Everyone who mentioned Yusuf mentioned the fever, the funeral, the tragedy. Nobody asked who he'd been before that. "He was generous to a fault," I said, and a small laugh escaped me despite the tears. Too generous. If he saw a hungry kid on the block, he'd give away his own lunch. I slapped him once, the only time in his life I ever hit him, because he gave his good sneakers to a boy who had none and walked home in socks in the snow. I was so angry. Now I would give anything to see him do something that foolish and kind one more time. "That fever didn't win Amina," Isa said quietly. "It only moved him somewhere the cold can't reach him, and the generous heart you raised is not punished for its softness anymore." "Do you believe that?" I asked. "Truly, that I'll see him again?" "I don't just believe it," he said, and something in his voice carried an authority that didn't match a man who'd been begging for water an hour before. "I know it, and one day you'll understand exactly how I know." That night, I asked why the whole block had turned its back on him. He said something I've repeated to myself 1,000 times since. Kindness in this world always makes somebody uncomfortable. The people who've built their whole lives on hoarding can't stand to watch somebody give freely. It reminds them of what they've lost. I offered him the couch. He refused, said I should sleep in my own bed for once, and let him rest by the door instead, like a man keeping watch. I didn't understand it, but there was something about him that made arguing feel unnecessary. I slept better that night than I had in months. Morning came, and with it, the second thing I couldn't explain. I went to check the water jug, expecting it empty from the day before. It was full. Not just full, overflowing clean, cold water that had no business existing given what I'd poured out on the sidewalk less than 24 hours earlier. And on my kitchen table sat a bag of groceries I hadn't bought. Bread, rice, a carton of eggs, dates, a container of oil. I stood in my doorway with my hand over my mouth. "Isa," I said when he came in from the yard, "where did this come from? I have no money. I bought none of this." He looked at the food, unbothered, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "You gave what you had without holding anything back," he said. "It doesn't surprise me that it came back to you multiplied. That's not magic, Amina. That's simply how generosity works when it's honest. What's given freely is never truly gone." I didn't understand it then. I'm not sure I fully understand it now. I only know my jug was full and my table had food on it, and outside the fence my little garden, which had been dying in that heat for weeks, had gone green and thick overnight. Tomatoes swelling on vines that had been bare and yellow the day before. Word travels fast on a block like mine. Within an hour, 3 neighbors had come by just to check on me, which meant they'd seen my garden over the fence and couldn't make sense of it. By that afternoon, it had reached Malik. I remember him standing at my gate, staring at the tomatoes like they'd personally insulted him. "How," he said, not even bothering with a greeting, "does a woman with a shut-off water bill have the only green garden on this block?" God provides, I told him, and I meant it more literally than I understood at the time. He didn't like that answer. Men like Malik never do. If it isn't something they can buy, count, or take credit for, it makes them suspicious. And suspicion, in a man like that, curdles fast into something meaner. That evening, Isa told me plainly that trouble was coming. Prepare yourself, he said. What you've received will provoke people who've built their whole identity on having more than everyone else. The light in your house is going to bother men who love the dark. I didn't have to wait long to see what he meant. Malik couldn't let it go. My garden ate at him for 2 days before he found his angle. He called Tariq and Bilal, 2 men on the block everyone knew you couldn't trust with a $5 bill, let alone the truth, into the back of his store, and I heard about what happened there only afterward from my niece, who heard it from half of South End Dearborn within the hour. I'll give each of you $200, Malik reportedly told them, if you stand up at the community meeting Friday and say you saw this drifter stealing from the mosque's food pantry. Say he's been casing houses. Say he's dangerous, maybe on something, maybe worse. People are scared enough of a stranger sleeping in Amina's house that they won't ask too many questions. And if nobody believes us? Tariq apparently asked. They'll believe you, Malik said. People are already primed to be afraid of a homeless man they don't recognize. Fear doesn't need much help. It just needs a name to attach itself to. Friday came. The community meeting was held at the mosque's rec hall, the way it always was for anything serious. A dispute over a fence line, a decision about renovations, this time, apparently, a public referendum on whether a man who'd done nothing but sleep on my couch and fix my leaking pipe should be run out of the neighborhood. I want to be honest with you here, because Isa always was honest with me. What Malik did was cruel and specific to him. It wasn't the neighborhood's fault, and it wasn't anyone's faith that pushed him to it. Plenty of people in that hall loved God sincerely and simply got swept up in fear stirred by one greedy man. I don't want you thinking this story blames a whole community for what one man chose to do. It doesn't. It never has. I went with Isa, my legs shaking the whole walk over. We should just leave, I told him. Slip out before Friday. I know a bus that goes to my cousin's in Toledo. No, Amina, he said, calm as still water. A man who's telling the truth doesn't need to run from it. We're going to walk into that hole, and the truth is going to stand up on its own 2 feet. Trust me. The hall was packed. Imam Rashid, the eldest and most respected man on the community board, sat at the front table, his gray beard catching the fluorescent light. Malik sat off to the side with a look of quiet triumph already settling on his face, Tariq and Bilal near him, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. We have serious accusations tonight, Imam Rashid said, once the room quieted. Brother Malik has asked to bring forward 2 witnesses regarding the man staying with Sister Amina. Tariq stood first, voice shaking slightly. I saw him, he said, not looking at Isa, late one night, going through the food pantry boxes behind the mosque, taking things. I didn't say nothing at the time because I wasn't sure, but I'm sure now. Bilal stood next. Same, he said. I saw him casing houses on dicks, looking in windows. Man's dangerous. We don't know where he came from or what he's running from. A murmur went through the room. Fear is a fast-moving thing, and I watched it move face to face like a wind through wheat. Imam Rashid turned to Isa. You've heard the accusations. What do you say? Isa stood. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. I'll ask 3 questions and then let this room decide for itself, he said. He turned first to Tariq. You say you saw me at the food pantry at night. Tell me, what night was it? What time? How much did I supposedly take, and where did I put it, since Sister Amina's house has been searched by nobody and holds nothing that isn't hers? Tariq's mouth opened and closed. I don't remember exactly which night. Isa turned to Bilal. You say you saw me looking in windows on digs. Tell this room, which houses, whose windows? Did anyone call the police that night? File a report. Mention it to a single neighbor before tonight. Bilal said nothing. His jaw tightened, and he stared at the floor. Then Isa turned to Malik, and his voice, though still quiet, seemed to fill every corner of that hall. And my third question is for you, Malik. How much did you pay each of these men? I believe it was $200 apiece. Ask them to empty their pockets, Imam Rashid, and this community will see exactly what kind of truth was purchased here tonight. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever sat inside of. Imam Rashid, after a long pause, said simply, Empty your pockets, both of you. Tariq's hands shook as he pulled out a folded stack of bills. Bilal did the same, refusing to look at anyone. $400 in 20s, right there on the community hall floor. The room erupted, not in violence, but in the low, furious murmur of people who'd nearly been talked into turning on an innocent man by fear and greed dressed up as concern. Malik stood, face red, and tried to bluster his way out of it. This is a setup. This drifter's playing tricks on all of you. But nobody was listening to him anymore. His own neighbors were looking at him the way you look at someone you thought you knew. Brother Malik, Imam Rashid said, and his voice carried the particular disappointment of an elder who has genuinely respected a man for years. You will address this board and this stranger properly, or you will leave this hall tonight and reconsider your standing in this community. Malik didn't answer. He turned and walked out, Tariq and Bilal trailing behind him, and the door swung shut hard behind them. I sat there next to Isa, shaking, not from fear anymore, but from something closer to awe. How had he known the exact amount? Nobody had told him. Nobody could have told him. I looked over at him. He wasn't gloating. If anything, his face had gone sad, watching the door where Malik had disappeared. He's not finished hurting, Isa said quietly, more to himself than to me. A man like that doesn't come apart all at once. Sometimes it takes losing something he actually loves before the walls come down. I didn't understand what he meant, not yet. 3 days later, half of South End Dearborn got sick. It started with a handful of kids running fevers after that miserable heat wave broke into violent thunderstorms, and the storm sewers backed up into basements along low-lying stretches of dicks. Within 48 hours, it wasn't a handful. It was families up and down 4 blocks running fevers, vomiting, too weak to stand, with the ER at Beaumont so backed up that people were being told to stay home and ride it out unless they were in real danger. Water contamination, the health department said later, though at the time nobody knew what was happening, only that people they loved were burning up and there wasn't enough clean water in the neighborhood to keep them hydrated, because half the block still had their water shut off, same as I'd had. Except mine wasn't shut off anymore. Mine had never run dry since the morning I found it full. Word got around fast, the way desperate word always does, that Amina Saleh's water hadn't stopped running, and that the stranger in her house had a way of making sick things well. I don't fully know how that second part started, except that Isa had gone and quietly sat with a coughing toddler down the block 2 nights before, and the fever had broken by morning, and people talk. They started showing up at my gate, mothers with babies pale and limp in their arms, old men who'd been proud their whole lives, now reduced to begging at a poor widow's fence. The same people who 2 weeks earlier had watched Isa collapse on the sidewalk without lifting a finger. I want to tell you honestly, for one bitter second, something ugly rose up in me. Where were you when he was dying in the street? I thought. Where were you when my water was cut off and none of you offered me a drop? But Isa must have seen it on my face because he put his hand on my shoulder. Amina, he said, what good is loving only the people who've already loved you well? Anyone can do that. Real love reaches the people who wronged you too. Bring the water. Help me carry it. So I did. I filled cup after cup from that jug that would not run dry, and I carried them out to fevered mouths, and Isa went from person to person, laying his hand on burning foreheads, and one after another the fevers broke. I watched children who'd been listless and gray-lipped an hour before sit up and ask for their mothers by name. I watched an old man who'd needed 2 people to carry him to my gate walk home on his own legs that same evening. By nightfall, the whole block that had once whispered about crazy old Amina was standing outside my fence in tears, thanking a man they'd tried to run out of the neighborhood on paid lies 4 days earlier. One house stayed dark that whole day, Malik's. I found out why after the sun went down, when he showed up at my door with his grandson Zaid limp in his arms, the boy's small body burning hot enough that I could feel the fever through his shirt from 3 feet away. Malik's face, the same face that had laughed at a dying man on the sidewalk 2 weeks before, was wrecked with a kind of terror I'd never seen on him. Amina, he said, and his voice broke completely on my name. Please, I know what I did. I know I don't deserve to ask you anything, but he's all I have left in this world. Please. I looked at this man who'd tried to have Isa run out of the neighborhood on lies, who'd mocked me in front of the whole block, who owned the roof over my head and had never once asked if I could afford to keep it. And I found, to my own surprise, that I didn't hate him. I only felt sorry for him. Come in, I said. The boy is innocent of his grandfather's sins. Isa was waiting, like he'd known Malik was coming before I did. Malik fell to his knees right there on my kitchen floor, Zaid cradled against his chest. I paid men to lie about you, he said to Isa, the words spilling out fast and broken. I wanted you gone. I wanted this woman's land. I've spent my whole life thinking the number in my bank account was the same thing as my worth, and I laughed at a dying man in the street because I thought that made me strong. I am not asking for myself. Take everything I have. Just save my grandson. Isa knelt down slowly and looked at Malik with an expression I can only describe as heartbroken tenderness. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just grief for a man who'd nearly lost everything before he understood what mattered. Malik, he said, I'm going to help your grandson, but hear me first, because this matters more than his fever, even though you can't see that yet. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? You've spent years building bigger barns while men died of thirst on your own sidewalk. Tonight isn't a punishment. It's mercy wearing the face of a tragedy, trying to reach you before it's too late. Malik was sobbing now, openly, the kind of crying men like him spend a lifetime refusing to do in front of anyone. Isa placed his hand on Zaid's forehead. Wake up, little one, he said quietly. Your grandfather still has some learning left to do, and he shouldn't have to do it without you." The boy stirred. His breathing, which had been shallow and fast, slowed and deepened. Color came back into his face like ink spreading through water. Within a minute, Zaid opened his eyes, blinked at the strange room, and said, in the plain, unimpressed voice of a healthy 7-year-old, "Grandpa, I'm thirsty." Malik broke down completely, clutching his grandson, saying his name over and over. When he could finally speak, he looked up at Isa. "How can I ever repay this?" "Don't repay me," Isa said. "Repay the block. You've spent years taking from people who had less than you. Starting tomorrow, you're going to start giving it back. Every family behind, on rent in your buildings. Forgive what they owe. Open your storefront basement as a cooling shelter for the next heat wave. And you're going to start with the woman whose water never ran dry while yours sat shut off in judgment on the sidewalk." Malik turned to me, and for the first time in the 2 decades I'd rented from him, I watched real shame cross his face. "Amina, I raised your rent 3 times in 5 years. I sent a man to your door threatening eviction the winter your husband died. I am so sorry. Whatever you need. The house is yours, free and clear. I'll draw up the paperwork myself." I didn't answer him with words. I hugged him. This man who, 2 hours earlier, I would have said I could never forgive, and I felt something in my own chest loosen that I hadn't even realized was still clenched. 12 years of quiet resentment toward men who'd looked past me my whole life, dissolving in that one small kitchen. Malik kept every promise. Within a week, he'd forgiven back rent for 6 families on our block. His storefront basement became a real cooling shelter with donated fans and cases of water. And every evening, he'd walk over with Zaid to sit on my porch, the 2 of us talking while the boy played in my garden that never stopped producing tomatoes no matter how much I gave away. "I don't understand it," Malik said to me one evening, maybe 2 weeks after Zaid's fever broke. "I spent 40 years thinking the man with the most was the richest man on the block. Now I give things away and somehow I still don't run out. How is that possible?" "You're finally understanding what he tried to tell you the first day," I said. "You just needed to almost lose everything to hear it." Isa stayed with me nearly a month in total, and during that time, something was shifting in me that I didn't have language for yet. I had grown up honoring Isa, Jesus, as a prophet, one of the great messengers of God, born miraculously of Mary, destined to return at the end of the age. That much my faith had always taught me, and I'd never questioned it. But this man sitting on my porch didn't just speak about God the way a prophet speaks for someone greater than himself. He spoke with an authority that seemed to originate in him. He forgave debts as though the debts were owed to him personally. He said sins were forgiven the way you'd only say it if you were the one being sinned against. He said, "I know about my son waiting for me on the other side of death with a certainty that unsettled something old and settled in my understanding." One night, sitting together while Zaid chased fireflies in the yard, I finally asked him outright. "Isa," I said, "my whole life I was taught you were a prophet of God, a great one, but a man like Musa, like Ibrahim, sent to guide us and then gone. But you don't talk like a man sent to deliver a message. You talk like the message is coming from inside you. Who are you? Truly." He was quiet a long moment, watching Zaid's small silhouette dart after the fireflies in the dark. "You gave a stranger water when you had almost nothing," he said finally. You opened your door when the whole street had closed theirs, and every time you did that, Amina, you did it for me. What you did for the least of these, you did for me." "That's what a prophet might say on God's behalf," I said carefully, "but that's not quite an answer." He turned and looked at me, and there was something in his face I hadn't seen in the whole month I'd known him. A kind of grief mixed with love, so large it looked almost like pain. "I am not only a messenger carrying someone else's word, Amina," he said quietly. "I am the Word. Before Ibrahim was, I am. The bread you shared with me, I am the bread that never runs out. The water you poured out, I am the water that never leaves anyone thirsty again. I did not come only to tell you God loves the world. I came because I am how God loves the world." I sat very still. Everything I had been taught my whole life rose up in me at once. The careful, respectful distance my faith had always kept between God and any created being, the certainty that no man could claim what he seemed to be claiming. And yet I had watched my well never run dry. I had watched a dying child open his eyes at the sound of his voice. I had watched a man's 40 years of hardened greed crack open in a single night, not from fear, but from something that felt unmistakably like love reaching him exactly where he stood. "I don't know what to do with that," I said honestly, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to know tonight," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to understand it all at once. I'm only asking you to keep watching. The truth doesn't need you to force yourself into believing it. It only needs you to stay close enough to see it clearly in your own time." He left 3 days later, at dawn, the same quiet way he'd arrived. No announcement, no dramatic farewell speech to the whole block. Just a man with a walking stick and worn boots standing at my gate as the sun came up over the rooftops on Dix. "I have other doors to knock on," he told me. "Other Aminas, other Maliks who need to lose everything before they understand what they actually have." "Will I see you again?" I asked, and I heard my own voice crack the way it had the night I told him about Yusuf. "You'll see me every time you open your door to someone the world has stopped looking at," he said. "Every time you pour out water for someone who has none. I'm not leaving you, Amina. I'm only changing where you'll find me." I watched him walk down Dix Avenue until he turned the corner by the old Ford plant and was gone from sight. And I stood there a long time afterward with my hand pressed against the gate, feeling like I'd been both filled up and hollowed out in the very same moment. It took me another 2 years to do what I am about to tell you, and I want to be honest about that, because I think the 2 years matter as much as what came after them. I did not rush into anything. I am not a woman who rushes. I kept praying my 5 daily prayers. I kept my fasts. I did not abandon the faith my mother handed me at the airport in Sana'a, not casually, not without a war fought quietly inside my own chest for months at a time. But I also kept going back over and over to that porch conversation. I am the Word. I am the bread that never runs out. Before Ibrahim was, I am. I read what I could find about him in the New Testament quietly at my kitchen table, the way you'd read a letter from someone you already suspected loved you. I talked with a gentle old pastor named Daniel from the small church 2 blocks over, a man who never once pushed, who let me ask my questions at whatever pace they came. And slowly, the way my garden had turned green overnight, but also the way real seasons actually change 1 degree at a time, I came to understand that I already believed. I had believed since the night on my porch. I had simply needed 2 years to stop being afraid of what believing would cost me. What finally moved me wasn't an argument. It was remembering, again and again, that every single thing he told me came true. My son was waiting for me. My jug never ran dry the entire month he stayed under my roof. A hardened man's heart broke open, not from punishment, but from love. He had told me the truth about all of it before I had any way of confirming it myself. I told Pastor Daniel I was ready on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He didn't rush me even then. He asked me 3 times if I was certain, gently, the way you'd ask someone about to make a decision that would cost them people they loved. It did cost me people. I won't pretend otherwise because Isa never once asked me to pretend. Some of my family stopped speaking to me. A cousin who'd been like a sister called me a traitor to my mother's memory, and that one still aches some nights more than I let on. But my mother taught me to open the door to a thirsty stranger and see what happens, and in the end, that's exactly what her teaching led me to. Malik came to the baptism. So did Zaid, 17 now, tall as his grandfather, standing quiet and serious near the back of that small church 2 blocks off Dick's. Malik didn't understand every part of what I was doing that day, and he told me so plainly, the honest way he'd talked to me ever since that night with Zaid's fever. But he said, "Whatever this is, Amina, I trust you. I watched what that man did in your house. If he's who you say he is, I want to understand it too someday." I stood in that small baptismal pool in a plain white dress, 80 years old, my hands shaking, the way they'd shaken the day I carried a 5-gallon jug out to a dying stranger on the sidewalk. And Pastor Daniel asked me, in front of the small gathering of people who'd come to stand with me, "Amina, do you believe Jesus Christ is Lord, not simply a prophet, but the Son of the living God, your Savior?" "I do," I said, and my voice didn't shake at all when it mattered. Jesus is Lord, not only a messenger, Lord over my life the way he was Lord that summer. He sat at my table and my jug never ran dry. They lowered me into the water and I came up gasping, laughing and crying at the same time, water running down my face the way it had run down a dying man's throat on my front steps 8 years before. And I understood finally, all the way through my body and not just my mind, what he'd been trying to tell me the whole time. He hadn't just visited my house that summer. He'd been rebuilding it from the foundation up, one act of mercy at a time, until there was room in me for the whole truth to finally stand. I am 81 now. My knees are worse. My hands shake more than they used to. But my garden still gives more tomatoes than one old woman can eat, and I still fill cups of water for anyone who knocks on my gate, because I learned a long time ago that you never really know who's standing on the other side of your door. Malik still visits every week. He's an old man himself now, gentler than the one who laughed at a dying stranger on a summer sidewalk. Zaid brings his own children by sometimes, and I tell them the story, the same way I used to tell it to their father when he was small. How a stranger collapsed on Dick's Avenue, and how the whole street closed its doors, and how one old woman with almost nothing left decided to open hers anyway. "And was it really him, Grandma Amina?" the littlest one asked me last spring, the way children always ask, wanting to hear the ending again, even though they already know it. Was it really Jesus? It was, I told her. And here's the secret nobody tells you until you're old like me. He doesn't only come once. He comes back every single day, wearing a different face. The tired man at the bus stop, the neighbor who's fallen behind on rent, the stranger nobody else will look at. Every time you open your door to one of them, sweetheart, you're opening it to him. I think about that morning on the sidewalk more often now than I used to, now that my own time is getting shorter. I think about how close I came to walking past him like everyone else did. How easily I could have decided my own 5 gallons mattered more than a dying stranger's thirst. I am not afraid of what's coming. Isa promised me a long time ago that my Yusuf is waiting, and Isa has never once told me something that didn't turn out to be true. When my time comes, I believe I'll open my eyes and find my son running toward me, the way he used to run toward me as a boy, arms open and somewhere behind him, a familiar figure in a worn gray shirt waiting by a door that never, ever runs dry. If you take one thing from my life, let it be this. It isn't the water in the jug that matters. It's the hand willing to pour it out for somebody else. Whatever little you think you have, it's enough if you're willing to share it. And you never know, not really, not until the very end, exactly who you've been giving it to all along. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.